Have you ever had that feeling when you know something isn't right, but you just can't prove it? Like when you're a kid and you know your parents are keeping something from you, but they just won't admit it. That's exactly how this whole story feels. It's been over 20 years since Princess Diana died, and we're still finding out that the story we all believed wasn't even close to the truth. Charles Spencer, Diana's brother, finally sat down and said what so many people have been thinking for years. And honestly, the part that really gets me is how one single lie changed everything about what happened at that funeral. It's not just a small detail either. It's the whole reason two little boys ended up walking behind their mother's coffin in front of the entire world. Let me take you back to that day. We've all seen the picture, it's everywhere, you can't escape it. Two boys, one 15 years old and one just 12, walking slowly behind their mother's coffin. Prince William with his head hanging down, Prince Harry looking so tiny and lost. The whole world was watching them, looking at their faces, waiting for a tear, waiting for them to break down. People talk about British stoicism and doing your duty when they look at that picture. But when you hear what Charles Spencer is saying now, it makes you realize that the whole reason those boys were there was built on something that wasn't true at all. And here's the weirdest part. Nobody will just answer the simple question of who actually made that decision. What Charles Spencer is telling us now isn't just sad. It's actually infuriating. Because it all comes down to one thing: manipulation. That image of the funeral procession didn't just happen naturally. It was a decision made in a boardroom by people who cared more about how things looked than how two grieving children felt. Charles Spencer, who was Diana's younger brother, was the only person in that room who apparently had the guts to scream no at the top of his lungs. He's been talking about what happened in those few days between Diana's death and her funeral. And when you look at how that procession came together, it makes absolutely no sense if anyone was actually thinking about protecting those children. So here's what Spencer says happened. He was on the phone with a palace official, someone whose job it was to organize the funeral, when they just casually dropped into the conversation that William and Harry would be walking behind the coffin. Like it was the most normal thing in the world, like it made perfect sense. Spencer's reaction was instant. He said absolutely not. He told them Diana would have never ever wanted her sons to do this. It wasn't a polite disagreement. It was a firm, gut-level refusal. He knew exactly what it was: a parade of heartbroken children for the cameras. He told them it was deeply unnatural and cruel to force two boys, who were still in the worst shock of their lives, to march in a straight line while millions of people cried watching them. Now here's where the story gets really messed up. When Spencer pushed back, the palace's response was ice cold. They just said it has been decided. That was it. No negotiation. No discussion about how this might mess up those kids mentally. Just a flat declaration that this was happening and he couldn't stop it. Spencer didn't back down easily. He kept pushing. He kept demanding they think about the psychological damage this would do. He knew his sister. He knew the pressure of the royal institution. And he knew that making a 12-year-old walk through a state funeral march was a recipe for years and years of therapy. But then, somewhere in all the arguing, something changed. The palace told him that William and Harry themselves wanted to do it. They made the choice themselves. That changed everything for Charles Spencer. If his nephews, even though they were so young, had made the conscious choice to say goodbye to their mother in this public, painful way, who was he to get in their way? He didn't want to force them into something they didn't want. But he also respected their right to make their own decision. So he dropped it. He let the whole thing go because he believed he was honoring their choice. And that's where the trap was set. Because we now know from Prince Harry himself that they were never given a choice. Not even close. Harry has said that as a 12-year-old, you don't get a vote when you're in a room full of senior royals and palace officials. You are told what to do. You get put in a suit and you walk, that's it. So here's the part that makes no sense. Charles Spencer was basically neutralized by a lie. He was the only person who had the power and the fury to stop that awful spectacle. And he was told a story that made him back down. If that's really what happened, and all the evidence says it is, then you can't call this a duty narrative. It makes way more sense as a calculated move to control how things looked on television, no matter how much it cost those kids emotionally. Now let's talk about the morning of September 6th, 1997. The air in London was heavy. You could feel the weight of it. The streets were covered in flowers and handwritten notes and grown adults crying so hard they could barely stand. And then the coffin appears. And behind it, Charles Spencer is walking right alongside Prince Charles and Prince Philip. But every single eye, every single camera, is locked onto the two small figures in front of them. Prince William, trying so hard to look strong at 15, and Prince Harry, completely hollow-eyed at 12. Spencer has said that while the world watched them and saw bravery, He looked at them and saw two children carrying a burden they should never have been given. The walk from Kensington Palace to Westminster Abbey is brutally long. The sound of the crowd's grief was deafening, a constant roar of crying, but the boys never broke. Harry later described a feeling of complete numbness, like his emotions had just shut down, like he was watching someone else's life play out on a screen. For Charles Spencer, the pain of that day wasn't just about losing his sister, who he truly adored. It was the agony of realizing he had lost the battle to protect her sons from this moment. He had been tricked into going along with it, and now all he could do was walk beside them while they suffered in front of the whole world. But then something happened that nobody expected. Charles Spencer stood up at that pulpit inside Westminster Abbey, and he didn't just deliver a eulogy. He drew a line in the sand that the royal family is probably still trying to erase. Standing there, he didn't talk about Diana in the past tense. He spoke for her in the present. He called her the most hunted person of the modern age. And he didn't just blame the paparazzi. He blamed the institutions and the systems that failed to protect her. The royal family was sitting right there. The Queen with her stone face, Prince Charles showing absolutely no emotion, and Spencer's words were cutting right through that abbey. Then he made a promise that made headlines all over the world. He promised that Diana's blood family, the Spencers, not the Windsors, would always be there to protect and guide William and Harry. It was a direct challenge to the royal family's authority. He was telling the monarchy, in their own church on their own turf, that they weren't good enough to raise these boys by themselves. And the response was something you almost never see at a royal event. People started applauding. It started outside, rippling through the crowds listening on speakers. And then it crept into the abbey. Dignitaries, celebrities, ordinary people in the pews all started clapping. It was a spontaneous, defiant roar of agreement. Spencer had said what a grieving, angry public felt. Diana had been wronged, and someone was finally brave enough to say it out loud in the most official setting possible. But here's the sad truth. Charles Spencer would later admit that keeping that promise was practically impossible. As powerful as his words were, William and Harry were already part of the royal system. There was no legal way for him to just take them and raise them the way Diana might have wanted. The monarchy controlled their future, their education, their public roles, and the stories people told about them. And Spencer could do absolutely nothing about it. To really understand the anger in that eulogy, you have to go back to the moment Charles Spencer first got the phone call. Because the way the royal family handled everything right after the crash is a perfect example of how emotionally disconnected they were. The crash happened in a Paris tunnel in the early morning of August 31st. A Mercedes trying to outrun photographers crumpled like a tin can. Diana was alive, but barely. Miles away in South Africa, Charles Spencer was asleep when the phone rang. The first call was just that there'd been an accident. He sat up, his mind racing, knowing right away that the press had finally pushed too far. He waited, his heart pounding, for an hour. Then the second call came, and the voice on the other end was cold. "I'm sorry, sir, she didn't make it." He knew exactly who to blame, the paparazzi who had chased her for years. But there was no time to grieve because the whole world was about to find out. And the reaction of the royal family is where the disconnect became a huge gap. When the news hit, the public reaction was immediate and emotional. People flooded into the streets crying, collapsing, covering their faces with their hands. Outside Buckingham Palace and Kensington Palace, flowers piled up by the thousands. It wasn't just mourning. It was a collective scream of heartbreak, but something really strange was happening at the top. The royal family was completely silent for hours, then days, no public statement, no national address, no sign that they were grieving with the people. They stayed at Balmoral Castle in Scotland, hidden away from view. At first, people assumed they were in shock, but as the days went on, the silence started to feel like they just didn't care. The questions started getting louder. Why wasn't the Queen saying anything? Why wasn't the flag at Buckingham Palace lowered to half-mast? Why weren't Charles and the boys in London? The newspapers, which usually treated the monarchy with so much respect, turned on them. The headlines screamed things like betrayal. Where's our Queen? Where's our flag? The British public felt abandoned. This was Diana, the people's princess, and the monarchy looked like they didn't know what to do, or worse, that they just didn't care. While the whole world was demanding answers, William and Harry were suffering in complete silence inside Balmoral. Prince Charles had to sit them down and explain that their mother had died in a car crash. She wasn't coming back. Harry, just 12 years old, kept asking the same question over and over. Is she really gone? They had talked to her on the phone just the day before. It was a quick, casual conversation. A call you later moment that now felt like the most unfair thing in the universe. In those first few days, they were kept away from the public. surrounded by a family that wasn't exactly known for showing emotion. Harry later admitted he felt confused. The whole world was crying, but inside the palace there was just this heavy silence. Nobody talked about Diana. Nobody comforted them the way they desperately needed. The pressure on the royal family eventually became a full-blown crisis. The outrage was too loud to ignore. On September 5th, 5 days after Diana died, the Queen finally spoke to the nation. Sitting in front of cameras, she talked about a remarkable human being and praised Diana as a loving mother. She said she understood the people's grief and that they had all lost someone irreplaceable. But for many people, it was just too late. The damage was already done. The monarchy had looked out of touch, cold, and distant at a time when warmth was needed most. Diana's death had revealed a huge gap between the institution and the people it was supposed to serve. Even after the Queen's speech, the resentment lingered because the difference between Diana and the royals had never been clearer. She was open and human. They seemed untouchable and distant. And now, after her death, that divide was a canyon. This brings us back to the funeral and that decision to make the boys walk. Charles Spencer never stayed quiet about what he saw as the royal family's failure, not just in Diana's life, but in her death. From the moment she married Prince Charles, he believed she was thrown into a system that didn't protect her. And even after she died, that same system kept failing her. Spencer's criticism of the royal family is the thread that ties this whole tragedy together. He never sugarcoated the truth because for him, Diana's story wasn't just about a tragic accident. It was about an injustice that started years before that tunnel in Paris. He said over and over that Diana was never truly accepted by the royal family. She went from being a 19-year-old girl full of life to a woman trapped in a cold, rigid system. She was expected to smile, follow the rules, and just ignore her pain. And when her marriage to Charles fell apart so publicly, she was pushed even further away. Spencer was furious about this. He said in interviews that the palace knew the press was hunting her. They knew she had lost her proper security after the divorce, and they did nothing. The result was a woman who was constantly running. And on August 31st, 1997, that running finally caught up with her. His eulogy was the peak of all that anger. He said Diana needed no royal title to continue to generate her particular brand of magic. That was a bold statement. What he meant was that Diana's power had never come from the monarchy. It had come from her. She didn't need them. They needed her. But Spencer's final words were what really shook the room. He promised that her sons would be protected from the same fate. He said their blood family would do all they could to continue the imaginative and loving way the royal family was steering these exceptional young men. You could hear the sarcasm dripping from his voice. He was making it crystal clear. You failed Diana, but we won't let you forget her sons. Spencer never softened his words. In later interviews, he described the royal family's treatment of Diana as inhumane. She had been used when they needed a bride and a mother for an heir, and then discarded when she became too popular, too independent, too difficult. He revealed that she had turned to him in deep distress, calling him crying, telling him how lonely she was, how trapped she felt, how nobody was listening. And nothing ever changed. His criticism remains one of the most honest, raw accounts of what life was really like for Diana behind palace walls. He didn't just blame the institution. He blamed specific people. He believed those inside the palace wanted Diana to be broken. They didn't like how much attention she took away from the rest of the family. In one interview, he said Diana was the most hunted person of the modern age, and she was left to face that hunt completely alone. Even after Diana died, Spencer believed the royal family failed her again with how they handled the funeral. He fought against the procession. He argued the boys were too young. But his protests didn't matter. The decision was made. And years later, Prince Harry himself admitted that it had traumatized him deeply. Spencer had been right all along, but once again, the royal family just hadn't listened. And here's where the story doesn't end because it lives on through her sons, especially Prince Harry. Charles Spencer spent years speaking out about how the institution failed Diana. But in the end, Prince Harry would take action. He would walk away, refusing to let history repeat itself. From the time he was a child, Prince Harry was compared to his mother. He had her rebellious streak, her warmth, and most of all, her deep discomfort with the royal system. He never forgot how she was treated. He remembered the press hounding her, the way she was left to struggle alone, and most painfully, how she was gone in an instant, chased to her death by the very media she had spent years trying to escape. That trauma shaped him completely. In interviews, he admitted that every time he saw paparazzi cameras flashing, it took him right back to that night in 1997. He saw history repeating itself, not just with himself, but with Meghan Markle. That was the moment he did something that shook the whole royal family to its core. He left. He saw Meghan facing the same treatment Diana had endured: the negative headlines, the attacks from inside the palace, the complete lack of support. Just like Diana, Meghan was struggling. He refused to let it happen again. In one of his most emotional interviews, he said he saw history repeating itself and felt helpless to stop it. But unlike Diana, he could escape. And so in 2020, Prince Harry and Meghan Markle made the shocking decision to leave the royal family. They moved to America, cutting official ties with the institution that had defined their whole lives. It was the boldest move any royal had made in modern history. But for Prince Harry, it wasn't rebellion, it was survival. Even in his departure, Prince Harry was following his mother's path. Diana had tried to break free in the years before she died. She had distanced herself from the monarchy, found a new life outside royal duties, and started speaking out about her struggles. She was redefining what a royal could be. Prince Harry was now finishing what she started. And Charles Spencer, the man who had fought so hard to defend his sister's legacy, quietly understood. While he didn't make huge public statements about it, it was clear that he understood why Prince Harry left. After all, he had spent decades criticizing the same system that Prince Harry was now rejecting. The whole thing is a brutal full circle tragedy. Charles Spencer stood up in that church and promised to protect Diana's boys from the machine that consumed her. He was blocked at every turn, deceived about their wishes, and forced to watch them march in a funeral that traumatized them. Now, decades later, one of those boys has physically removed himself from that machine entirely. The promise Charles Spencer made couldn't be kept within the walls of the palace, but it seems like, for Prince Harry at least, it was kept by leaving those walls behind completely. It's not really a victory. It's just a sad, inevitable conclusion to a story that started with a lie about a walk behind a coffin. And honestly, the fact that they still won't just answer the question of who really made that call is the strangest part of all of this.